I'm frequently asked what Bible version someone should use out of the many options that are available. Now, that's a question that's very difficult to answer because translation is by nature something that loses some of the meaning. That is not something that your translations do by error. It is simply a fact of translation. You can convey some part of the meaning, but you're not going to be able to convey all of the meaning by the various means. Now, as I've written in several places, and as you can find out in many books about Bible translation, there's kind of a variation in the basic approach between what is commonly called formal equivalence, which tries to get an English grammatical form, a word or combination of words for every form in the source language. On the other extreme, you would have functional equivalence, or sometimes called dynamic equivalence, which attempts to take the thought, interpret the original and find the meaning, and then express that meaning in good English or in a good form of whatever language it is that you're translating into. Now, each one of these methods has the things that it preserves, and it also has things that it loses. And when you are choosing a Bible to use, you have to consider what it is that you're going to do with it. So when I'm asked, what Bible version should I use? I have to ask, what are you going to do? Reading the Bible is not always the same thing. For example, you may be reading the Bible through in a year, reading 4 or 5 chapters a day, following various possible plans. On the other hand, you might be trying to read an entire book of the Bible, say read one of the Gospels, and get the whole picture of the story of Jesus very quickly. Yet, at another time, you might be trying to study out a particular verse or a short passage to find out its meaning in some kind of detail. Each one of these things that you might do will require different things of the Bible translation. For example, if you're trying to read in detail, one of the things you're very concerned with is the extent of the notes. If you're trying to read quickly, the level of English that is used, how complex is the language, is more important. You want to be able to cover a lot of ground. Now, various translations will do these things differently. Further, there are differences between various editions of the Bible, and there's simply a large number of questions that you might want to answer. I rate various Bible versions on these different topics on my site, mybibleversion.com. In this particular discussion, I want to talk a little bit about the NLT, the New Living Translation. One of the benefits here is that the New Living Translation comes out in many editions. People are frequently confused by the difference between a Bible version and the edition that is published. For example, I've been told that the Bible version that someone is using is the Life Application Study Bible. Life Application Study Bible is an edition of the Bible. Your study notes come in with your edition, how the book is laid out, the kind of binding, that's part of your edition. So for example, here, let's look at the NLT. I'm going to hold up here for you. This is NLT Study Bible. The NLT Study Bible is an evangelically oriented study Bible. You can see the text there at the top about where my little finger here is here on my right hand, and below that you have notes. You have fairly extensive introductions to the books. So that's a nice addition that you might have to study. Here is the Mosaic Study Bible. This brings together passages topically and readings that go with them and so on. So you have more of a topical approach to study. I've reviewed this on my own website. On the other hand, this is just a copy of the NLT with your written text there in columns, as you might expect in an older Bible. I have here on the fourth Holy Spirit Encounter Bible. This is a study edition, and it has various things in it other than the text. Now, it's simply largely a column by column Bible, as you're noting, but then it has insets and so on. Those are features of the edition and not of the translation. So you have to ask, what exactly am I going to use it for? So, what is the NLT particularly good for? It's one that I do like to recommend a lot, and especially for extended reading, where you want something that is easily readable and generally quite accurate. One of the weaknesses of a formal translation is simply that it passes on material from the original language that you might understand incorrectly. A functional translation does more interpretation in the process of translation. Now, every translation does interpretation. No matter how formal, there is some interpretation going on. But you're going to see a wider variety of possibilities in a more functional translation. I rate the NLT as a quite heavily functional translation compared to others, such as the New Revised Standard Version or, say, the New American Standard Bible, both of which are much more formal. So it's easy to read, it's easy to follow, the English is clear, and so it's especially good for extensive reading. It is also translated by a very qualified evangelically oriented translation committee, which means that to the extent that it is interpretive, it is competently interpretive. There's a very good reason to use some of these more interpretive Bibles in your serious study as well. So when you go to study and you want to compare a version, the NLT is a good one to add to the list because it's going to give you some serious ideas. How is it that these particular words can be understood? How can they be rendered in English, and how can they be expressed? So I'd give two key places that the NLT fills. The first is rapid or extended reading the Bible through, reading an entire book through. And the second is as a comparison version in the process of serious study of a passage. That's because of a highly qualified translation committee. The committee is evangelically oriented. You will find many places in here where if you take a more liberal or progressive approach, you might challenge a number of particular renderings, but that is simply one of the things that happens with translation. If you're going to translate, you have to understand. If you're going to understand, you have to interpret. And when you translate, that interpretation is going to be reflected in your translation. The way that somebody who does not read the original languages can protect against that is simply by comparing multiple versions. If I was to make a choice for comparing translations, if I was not going to use the original languages in a particular case, I might try something like the New Revised Standard Version, the New Living Translation for a more evangelical approach on the more functional side, and perhaps the Revised English Bible, which is one of my favorites, even though many people find the reading a little bit slow. The New Revised English Bible is a little more adventuresome than the New Living Translation. So that's where I'd put it. Fast reading, good comparison edition to have in your set of tools when you want to seriously study a passage, and overall a competent and readable functional equivalent translation of the Bible.